All right, everyone get ready because today we are going deep on a psychology study that you probably think you already know, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah, it's like
It
legendary.
is. It's one of those things that pretty much everyone knows, right? Like the experiment that supposedly shows how good people can turn bad.
Oh, absolutely. It's practically textbook psychology.
Exactly. But what if that good versus evil story, the one we've all heard, isn't actually the whole picture?
That's what's so interesting about this deep dive. I mean, we've got some sources that challenge that traditional take on the Stanford Prison Experiment, and you might end up questioning everything you thought you knew.
Okay, so just to make sure everyone's on the same page, what exactly happened in this experiment?
Well, back in 1971, a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo basically built a fake prison. It was in the basement of Stanford University. They took 24 college student volunteers, totally normal guys, and randomly made them either guards or prisoners.
And they were trying to see what happens when you put regular people in a situation where there's this huge power imbalance, right?
Exactly. And the results were, well, they were shocking. The experiment was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but they just shut the whole thing down after 6 days
Why?
because the guards got so abusive and the prisoners were, like, really suffering.
Yeah, I remember learning about it in school, and it's one of those things that just sticks with you. The idea that those guards were just average guys, but they got like swept up in the power of the situation. It's kind of scary.
It really is. And for decades, Zimbardo's take on the experiment, his interpretation, has been really influential.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. He said that the situation itself, the roles, the uniforms, the power, that stuff, was so powerful that it overrode the individual personalities of the guys involved. It was like a scary example of how anyone could become evil if you put them in the wrong circumstances.
But now, decades later, there are new voices and new evidence that are saying it might be more complicated than that, right?
Right, like we're getting a more complex pitch. One of the sources we have today comes from a journalist named Ben Blum. And what's interesting is that he actually had a personal connection to Zimbardo.
Oh, really? What's the story there?
Well, Bloom's cousin Alex was involved in a bank robbery, and Zimbardo was an expert witness for him during the trial.
Oh, wow. So Bloom probably went into all of this already kind of respecting Zimbardo and his work.
You would think, right, but it gets a little complicated.
Okay.
Zimbardo was defending Alex based on this idea that Alex was a good kid who just got caught up in a bad situation. So he was arguing that it wasn't really Alex's fault, but more like the situation that made him take part in the robbery.
So he used his own research, the Stanford Prison Experiment, to argue that situational forces can make someone do something they wouldn't normally do.
Exactly. It actually helped Alex get a lighter sentence. But here's the thing. Bloom found out later that his cousin Alex actually knew the whole time what the robbery was really about.
He wasn't some naive kid.
Nope, he knew what he was doing.
Wow. So that completely undermines Zimbardo's whole defense of Alex.
It does. And that was a turning point for Bloom. It made him question everything about Zimbardo and the Stanford Prison Experiment. So he started investigating, digging into the archives, trying to find the people who were in the experiment, and he basically uncovered a whole other side to the story.
Okay, so he started off with a personal stake in all of this. What did he find when he started digging?
He found a lot of inconsistencies and evidence that, well, it suggested that the Stanford Prison Experiment maybe wasn't the straightforward thing we all thought it was.
Okay.
Like, for instance, he found recordings of Zimbardo coaching one of the guards to be tougher on the prisoners.
Yeah.
But the whole story was that the guards' behavior happened naturally.
Wait, hold on. Zimbardo was encouraging the guards to be mean? That seems like a big problem. Like he wanted the experiment to turn out a certain way.
It definitely raises some questions. And this is where something called demand characteristics comes in.
Demand characteristics. What's that?
Okay, imagine you're in a psychology study. You're in this new place. You don't know what to expect, so you start looking for clues. You might start doing things based on how you think the researchers want you to act, even if they don't directly tell you to.
So it's like trying to figure out the rules of the game and play along, even if it means acting in a way you normally wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And in the Stanford Prison Experiment, those demand characteristics might have been super strong. The guards were in this totally new situation. Zimbardo was basically acting like the warden, and they probably felt pressure to act tough because they thought that's what was expected.
So if the guards were just playing along, does that mean the whole experiment was pointless? Like, we can't learn anything from it?
That's a good question, and that's where our next source comes in.
So we have this famous experiment, everyone says, proves situations can make us do terrible things. But maybe it's not so clear-cut, right? Like, Maybe those guards weren't the evil masterminds we thought they were. So where do we go from here? Like, how do we figure out the role of personality versus the situation?
Well, that's what makes this so interesting. Another source actually tackled that question but went about it in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
We were from Michael Stevens. He's a science communicator.
Okay.
And he tried to recreate parts of the Stanford Prison Experiment, but he did it ethically,
Yeah.
in a much more controlled way.
Wait, someone tried to like redo the Stanford Prison Experiment. I'm definitely interested. Tell me more. How do you even recreate something like that ethically?
Right. Obviously, you can't lock people up and force them to be guards. That's not okay.
Yeah.
So instead, Stevens focused on those core elements: anonymity, making people feel depersonalized, and power differentials.
Okay, I get it. So how'd he create those conditions without, being unethical?
Okay, so picture this. You're in a room that's totally pitch black. You can't see anyone else. You just have a number to identify you. You're on a team solving puzzles.
Okay.
But here's the twist. There's another team. They're competing against you. And, get this, you have a weapon.
A weapon. Now, this sounds like a sci-fi movie. What kind of weapon?
It's not really a weapon. It's more like this button that blasts a really loud, annoying noise into the other team's room if you press it. But the catch is, there is no other team. It's all fake.
So the people think they're competing, but really it's a test to see how willing they are to use this noise weapon. That's clever. Did they go all out on their imaginary opponents?
No. Actually, in the first part of the experiment, they hardly ever used the noise weapon, even when the other team blasted them with it.
Really? So even when they had the power to annoy someone, they didn't? That really makes you wonder about Zimbardo's conclusions.
Right, it does. But Stevens didn't stop there. Remember those demand characteristics?
Yeah.
Well, in the second part, he kind of hinted at what he wanted them to do. He told them their only job was to use that noise weapon.
So now they're being told to be annoying. Did that change things?
You'd think so. But even then, they still didn't overdo it. Nobody just held down the button or anything like that. They knew where the line was.
That's so interesting. It seems like their personalities, like their sense of what's right and wrong, was stronger than the situation.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, Stevens was very careful about who he picked for the study. He chose people who scored really high on morality tests.
So they were all good people. I bet Zimbardo had something to say about that.
He did. Stevens actually talked to Zimbardo about the results, and Zimbardo said because Stevens chose people who were so moral, he messed up the results. Zimbardo said it lessened how powerful the situation was.
So he's still saying the situation matters more than personality.
Kind of, yeah. He thought if Stevens had chosen a more diverse group of people, the results might have been different.
Well, I get that he wants to defend his own work, but I also think he's kind of missing the point.
How so?
Well, it's like he's saying the problem is they weren't bad enough. Like if they had been worse people, the experiment would have proven him right.
Interesting. It makes you wonder if Zimbardo just wanted to be right all along.
Right, and that's why having these different perspectives is so important. It makes you think more critically about what you're reading, about what you're hearing, and not just believing everything you're told, even if it comes from someone really important.
I agree. And the back and forth between Zimbardo and Stevens shows this big question in psychology. Is it our personality that determines our behavior? Or is it the situations we're in?
That's nature versus nurture, isn't it? I remember that from psych class. But it's not just a theory now. We see how this plays out in real life. And how people interpret these things can change how we understand the world.
You're right. That's exactly it. And what's fascinating is that they both seem to agree that there's no easy answer. It's not one or the other. It's both working together.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Like we all have certain tendencies. Maybe some people are naturally more angry, others are more cautious. But then the situations we're in can make those tendencies stronger or weaker.
Exactly. Like imagine someone cuts you off while you're driving. Some people might just let it go, but others might get really mad and honk their horn.
Oh, I know those people. Road rage is a perfect example.
It is. And even the calmest person has a breaking point. Like if they're in traffic on a hot day and already late, suddenly that calm person is the one honking.
So the situation doesn't make them angry out of nowhere, but it's definitely like a trigger. It brings out a side of them they usually keep hidden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to pay attention to both sides. Our own tendencies and the power of the situations we're in.
This is all making sense, but it's kind of overwhelming. How are we supposed to be, like, analyzing every situation and our reactions all the time? That sounds exhausting.
It doesn't have to be exhausting. It's more about developing this awareness, this sense of how those things are affecting you.
So it's less about overthinking everything and more about having a radar that's looking for those triggers.
Exactly. And the more you pay attention to those little cues inside yourself and around you, the better you get at dealing with them.
I'm starting to see how this relates back to the Stanford Prison Experiment. If those guards had been more aware of how the situation was affecting them, maybe they wouldn't have acted so terribly.
It's possible. And that's why Zimbardo, even with all the criticism, still says we need to understand the power of situations. He says we have to be careful about the environments we create and the systems we're in because they change how we act.
Okay, so we've gone from questioning the Stanford Prison Experiment to realizing it's not just about personality or the situation, but both. And now we're seeing how this all connects to the bigger picture, systems and environments. We covered a lot today.
We did. I think this is a good place to stop for now.
I agree, but I feel like we could keep talking about this forever.
Oh, definitely. In the next part, we'll look at how we can use these ideas in our lives. We'll talk about how understanding all of this can help us make better choices, whether it's in our relationships, at work, or even online.
Looking forward to it. I'm definitely going to be paying attention to those demand characteristics and how they're affecting me. This is a lot to think about. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive on the Stanford Prison Experiment. It's been a wild ride.
It has. We started off thinking we had this whole thing figured out, but then, we had to question everything.
And now I feel like we're seeing things in a whole new light.
Yeah, like there's a lot more nuance to it.
Before we started this, I always thought the Stanford Prison Experiment was just about how those guards messed up, like they just weren't strong enough to resist being bad. But now I see it differently. It's like a warning about how systems can bring out the worst in us.
I think that's a really important point. We tend to focus so much on individual responsibility, which is obviously important, but we forget about the bigger picture, the systems that are shaping our choices.
It's like it's easier to raise strong kids than to fix broken adults,
Well,
right? If we want to make a world where people are less likely to do bad things, we got to look at the environments they're in.
exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so challenging, but also so important. It means looking beyond ourselves and thinking about the structures that affect everyone.
So where do we even start? Systems can feel so big, like you can't change them.
I get that. Systems can feel overwhelming. I think the key is to start small. Focus on the systems we interact with every day.
So like work, school, our community, even online spaces.
Yeah. And start asking questions like, what are the rules? Who has power here? Are there things that encourage bad behavior?
It's like being a detective, looking for clues and patterns and seeing how those things influence people's actions.
That's a great way to put it. And once you see the patterns, you can figure out where to make changes. Even little changes can make a difference.
Okay, can you give me an example? How does this work in real life?
Sure. Let's say you work somewhere super competitive. Everyone's always stressed because they have to meet these crazy deadlines. And that pressure makes people do bad things. Burning out, cutting corners, even sabotaging each other.
That sounds awful.
It can be. But there's still things you can do. Be a good example yourself, even when it's hard. Speak up if you see something wrong, even something small, and push for policies that help people have a better work-life balance.
So it's not just about being a good person within the system, it's about trying to change the system itself.
Exactly. And that's not just about the official rules, it's about the unwritten ones too. Like if everyone works late, even if they don't have to, then it's hard to set boundaries and take care of yourself.
So it's about challenging the status quo, questioning the things everyone takes for granted.
Yeah. And that might be uncomfortable, but those small acts of courage can create big changes.
I'm also thinking about online spaces, like social media. The algorithms are designed to keep us hooked, even if it means showing us stuff that's harmful or causes arguments.
You're right. Social media is a perfect example of a system that can really affect how we behave. So being responsible online means thinking about what we're reading, what we share, and what we contribute to the online world.
So we have to ask ourselves, are we part of the problem or part of the solution?
Exactly. We have to realize our choices matter. We can use our voices and our actions to make things better online.
This all ties back to the Stanford Prison Experiment, doesn't it? It wasn't just about the guards and the prisoners, it was about the researchers who created the whole thing. They should have designed it ethically, thought about the potential for harm, and stepped in when things went wrong.
Absolutely. And that's not just a lesson for research. It's a lesson for leaders, for people making policies, for teachers, for anyone who can shape systems and influence other people.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important thing you want our listeners to remember? What should they do?
If I could sum it up, I'd say, Be aware of the systems you're part of, ask questions about their influence, and use your voice and actions to make them better.
I love that. It's a reminder that we're not just along for the ride. We can make a difference. We can make those systems fairer, kinder, and more aligned with our values. Yes. It all starts with awareness and questioning the way things are, being willing to imagine something better.
Well said. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive made you think, even if it made you uncomfortable. Because ultimately, we hope you feel empowered to see things in a new way and to use your own power to make a difference.
Keep asking the tough questions. Keep pushing for change. Remember, even small actions can have a big impact.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep diving deep.